was a founding board member, and I'm currently working with the Muskoka Community Land Trust. And I'm CEO of Tooketree Passive Homes, which is a sustainable prefabricated home builder here in Lake Base.
Nice, nice.
And I have a friend. So I want to kick us off with a land acknowledgement. And as we're in Bracebridge and libraries are amazing, I am using theirs. Libraries and housing go together. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Ojibwe, the Chippewa, and the Algonquin peoples. This land is part of the 1923 Williams Treaties. We recognize and appreciate the historic and present contributions that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people have made to our town and our country. And we challenge everyone here, myself absolutely included, to seek out knowledge and take actions towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to wellness for all and to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations.
We've been using social media to get questions from you, so I'm going to start asking these, and Nate and Melinda will do their best to answer. All of them are on housing, one of them may be on hockey and who they prefer on their team, but we'll throw that in later. It better be Maple Leafs. All right. There are 4 of us, 3 adults, 1 child, living in a small 2-bedroom apartment for which we pay $1,700. There's nothing out there that is affordable. What are you going to do for us locally? There's only one mic.
You have an answer for that?
I brought you in.
And he's not answering that?
No, I brought in a ringer. That's what they call that.
So I think the starting point has to be that honesty in this conversation where there is no quick fix, right? This is decades in the making, and it's going to take some time to get out of it, and we need to make sure we act with ambition and we act right away. And I want to start by saying, because sometimes you get pushed on the question, well, you've been there for a long time, what have you been doing? And we should be able to say, and I think we should all be equipped to say, that there's been a lot that we've done, because after decades of bipartisan neglect on housing, where there was downloading to provincial governments, and of course in Ontario, the problem is worse than anywhere else, because we're the only province in the country where social housing was downloaded to municipalities, ill-equipped to deal with it, and homelessness is worse in this province than other provinces as a consequence of that. So we, as of 2017, got the federal government back in the game through a national housing strategy, back in supporting non-market housing, getting rental housing built. There's tens of billions of dollars in low-cost financing. There are homes built today with those federal dollars. And so, yes, the challenge has become more acute, but it's partly because we need all levels of government working in concert to solve this problem together. And we also need to act, it's not enough to be heading down the right road and heading in the right direction. You need to act with the scale required to meet the scale of the crisis. And so I think this is the first time that I've seen a plan that is going to get homes built at a scale that is truly required. And so, I would say to a family who is struggling to say, how are we going to afford rent? I would say, one, security of tenure is everything on the rental side, and we've got to make sure we're setting best practices and pushing provinces to ensure that they've got strong rent control and security of tenure. But the federal side, we've got to use tools, one, to reward municipalities that are going to enable more home building, and we're doing that, reducing taxes, cutting red tape, but pushing municipalities on that front. We have deals with 200 municipalities through a program called the Housing Accelerator Fund. We're going to double down on that. 2, we are going to, through innovation financing to help organizations like Melinda's, we're going to just scale up as well by driving down the cost of home building, by making it easier and faster and more efficient to build. And we are going to make sure we also get the government back in the business of building affordable homes using and maximizing public land at a scale we haven't seen as well. And so, I think we, at a high level, if you want to make sure you see stability in the housing market on costs, you've got to make sure that supply is keeping pace with population growth. We can talk about how we've reduce immigration levels and ensure that those levels are more sustainable. Temporary immigration in particular had become unsustainable. We've taken action on that. And so housing and scale and housing, getting homes built and driving down the cost of home building is everything. And so we're going to empower the market to build, and we're also going to make sure we empower non-market actors to build as well. We were talking about earlier, but so that you see affordability in perpetuity. So, a long answer to say I don't think we're going to solve it overnight for a family like that, but we are putting many measures and taking in place and taking many steps to make sure there's affordability and things are getting built in an affordable way right now that'll serve us over the coming years.
So one of the things locally that we are incredibly rich in is people who want to solve this problem and recognize that this is a problem. And I am lucky to be involved with the Muskoka Community Land Trust. And who here in the room has heard of the Muskoka Community Land Trust? Okay, well that's pretty impressive. Excellent. For those who haven't, the Muskoka Community Land Trust is one of about over 40 organizations, not-for-profit organizations in Canada who acquire land for the purposes of meeting the community's highest needs. And in Muskoka, that is housing. So we are working with a number of municipalities across Muskoka to acquire land where we can build sustainable, dignified, beautiful, permanently affordable housing in our community for everybody. And the piece is the land stays off the market, so this is non-market housing. We are not-for-profit developer, and we are working with a number of partners in the community and volunteers in the community, and will be seeking significant federal funds to turn that into reality. We have a piece of property in Huntsville right now that we are aiming to start construction on in the fall and in design. So I would encourage everybody here to go to the Muskoka Community Land Trust's website and give us feedback and input on what you would like to see. And we have some board members in the back actually. Perhaps you want to put your name, hands up. Thank you. Please feel free to talk to them. And I think I actually have some forms in the back of my car for people to sign up for a list that I forgot to take out of the trunk when I was running through the rain. So we can get those. And we were just talking earlier, we have so many amazing organizations that are ready to solve the housing crisis and understand the problems. People with lived experience, people with incredible skills and expertise. And I'm inspired by the conversations we've had today. And if you have time and capacity to contribute your ideas and your vision to any of those organizations, many of whom have representatives of the staff, please join us. And we need a bold action, and we need to, this is like a moonshot. This is bold action in my view. This community, we need millions and millions of dollars of contributions to community because we have been stagnating in investment in housing. And we need housing as a human right, and it should be dignified for everybody. And we can do it, we know how, we just need to get moving quickly.
So just going from that, a lot of Western countries are also facing a housing crisis. So what do you think we can learn from them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at a parliamentary conference in September, and I was speaking to MPs from the UK and from Ireland, and we were commiserating over the shared challenges on this front. And I think there are shared challenges when it comes to, I think, a level of reservation over density that we've seen. And it's interesting because then you fly over Montreal and you're flying into Montreal and there's a ton of density there. There's a ton of gentle density. And so it really depends where you are in the country, what community you're in. So I do think, when you think of the action we've taken, yes, we can learn from other countries. I think we can also learn from our own history. I was having a debate with a conservative, and in the course of this election, they were saying, well, we don't need to do all this. We used to be able to build, we built affordable housing in the 70s and 80s. And it's like, yeah, with significant government action and financing. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, you don't know what you're doing and you've done a terrible job and housing used to get built in this country, but then push back against a strong, forceful public role like we used to see in this country. And so, yes, I think there's a lot to learn when you look at the innovation we see from other countries in the EU on prefabrication and modular offsite construction. The lessons learned from Japan on this front as well. There are lessons to be learned from France, for example, on non-market housing. France sets targets of every year when they build housing, 20% is non-market. Just for reference, 3.5% of our total housing supply in this country is non-market. We used to build a lot more non-market housing many years ago. And not just Liberal governments, by the way. In the 60s in Ontario, a provincial Conservative government created a housing authority that got more social housing built than certainly any Conservative government in my lifetime has ever built. And so it used to be there was a bipartisan consensus on a strong government role, knowing that the market isn't going to deliver the affordability we need on its own. And so we need, yes, of course, the market to be empowered to build and cut red tape and reduce taxes, drive innovation. We need all of that, drive customer, but we also need a strong public role to ensure there's community housing and more community housing. I mean, I think lessons to be learned from our history as well, just on co-op housing. I mean, just before the election, I was able to announce about $80 million for 3 co-op housing projects. It's part of a $1.5 billion co-op housing fund that was put in place about a year ago, and it's the first co-op housing investment in 30 years from the federal government. I mean, there's so much we can learn from other countries, but I just think there's so much we can learn from our own history, and I'll just close with this. In the Second World War, when you hear Mark Ryan talk about, what we used to be able to do in the Second World War, there's an organization called Wartime Housing Limited. C.D. Howe, the Minister of Everything, was responsible for it, and he brought in someone by the name of Joe Pigott, who was in the private sector, a contractor, to run it, and they built homes at scale on public land for those who were serving our country in the war. And it's that kind of ambition and scale that we need.
Nate's read the books.
I know, he's very good, isn't he?
A couple of other things, you summed it up very well, but other things that we can, again, we can learn from other countries, but we also were great innovators in Canada, and Europe has passive house standards and has rules about the need, including low carbon building materials. France has taken leadership in Europe in that, in terms of the requirement to build with materials that will not damage the climate and emit greenhouse gases, and will also provide materials like natural materials on the interior that will contribute to the wellness of people in the buildings. And in Canada, we actually, the Saskatchewan House is one of the first innovations in the world, in the Western world of our vernacular of construction, to be super insulated with natural materials building in the 60s. And so we have the know-how, we have the expertise, we have the people, and other countries have taken it up where we have left it behind. And we need to get back to the way that we were doing things in many ways, and with the new innovation and new knowledge that we have today.
Great. Okay, I think this one may be from my mother, or my sister posing as my mother, so I'll just read this straight out. How will my kids ever afford a house? Do I have to die so they can have mine? I'll give you the flip side of that too, just because someone else has asked. Will this program make my house worth less because it's my retirement? So 2 flip sides.
Yeah, so you'll get asked this question sometimes in politics where, like, what do you think the price of a home should be, and how you want me to lose equity in my home? And then on the flip side, young people especially, my brother will give me a hard time. He's 2 years younger and doesn't own a home, and he'll say, like, it's lost. Like, and I'll speak to young constituents who will say, I keep saving up a down payment, and prices keep running away from me. So we're just giving up. And I don't think we have to pit generations against each other on this. It is a generational fairness challenge, of course. Young people are worse off than their parents because of housing principally. Not just housing, but mostly because of housing. And it's because housing has run away from incomes. And so what the real answer is you need to make sure that you stabilize home prices so incomes have a chance to catch up. And that's why I say it's not a problem you're going to snap your fingers and solve overnight or in the course of a year. It does come down to building many more homes. I think, one thing we haven't talked about, but I always say it's 3 things that the government has to do. And you've heard me already say, get governments out of the way, so empower the market, and that is, there's too much red tape at the municipal level. Provinces could do a lot about this, but we are actively rewarding municipalities that take action. We promised to cut development charges by 50% on multi-unit residential builds, add density, but also drive down the costs. Innovation is a big part of it. We have to get governments back in the game, though, at the same time on community housing. But the third piece is we have to treat housing as a home first and an investment second. And we want to attract dollars to build. Of course we do. We want to attract dollars to build. But we don't want investment dollars to compete with residential, home buyers, those who are going to look at a house as a place to call home, because that's what it is. And so we are in this election promising one way to do that, which is to lift GST on new builds, but only for first-time home buyers, to treat housing as a home first. There are many, not to give up because it's not on our platform, but there are other ways we can think about this. I mean, New Zealand has a higher stress test for investors and the residential resale space, higher down payment rules. They treat it completely differently. Some jurisdictions in Canada, we have a short-term rental enforcement fund to help them with enforcement efforts, but jurisdictions will say, if you, Toronto does this, BC does this, it's sort of mixed across the country, but we'll say, if you've got a home, if you're living in it, great. You can use Airbnb when you're taking a vacation or for a secondary suite. But you can't buy up a home that could go to someone who is otherwise going to live in it full time and then rent it out as an investment property with short-term rentals. So there are ways we can, I think across the board, every rule we put in place, frankly, should be prioritizing a house as for what it is, which is a place to call home. And so I think that has to be a big part of the picture as well. Because the young people I speak to are also frustrated, many who are trying to buy a home, and are saying, well, I lost it, but who did I lose to? I lost to someone who is going to treat it as an investment property, and it's maddening. So I do think we have to look at those rules, make sure to prioritize the rules for those who are looking to get into the market. We have put other rules in place, of course. We have a first-time home savings account, which is sort of a marriage of a TFSA and RSP for someone to save up to get into the market. So we are taking action to help first-time home buyers, but I think overwhelmingly what's going to help them the most is a massive set of supply coming online. I know it's not going to, we are so far short, not to bore everyone with numbers, but we clock at about 240,000 housing starts. We're actually a bit below that over the last year. And CMHC will say we need to double that to keep pace with population growth, that even after the reduction in immigration levels. So even after accounting for that, we need to double the pace of home construction. We are far ways away from that, and that's not going to drive down, no one's going to lose their equity and lose their shirt. We're just catching up to where we need to be. And so I think there's a way of doing both in a serious way, and I think everyone recognizes that if home prices were to crash, it's massive structural problems, it's a massive economic collapse, but we also can't see them continue to run away from incomes. We need incomes to catch up.
Yeah, I think it seems, so as a mom, my son's not a teenager yet, so he's not moving out anytime soon. He's going to live with me forever still at this point, if you ask him. So it is a future me problem, and I worry about it. How he's going to be able to afford housing and have some flexibility in his life, or meet his goals. And I think part of this whole question speaks to the sort of counterintuitiveness of the problem. And because when we have everybody housed in dignified housing, and if we had 1/3 of our housing meeting the needs of those who need deeply affordable housing, if we had 1/3 of our houses as co-ops and rent give to income and other subsidized housing, we would always still have 1/3 of home ownership, and those homes aren't going to go down in value per se. People who already own homes, as long as we can, by building those homes for people who currently can't afford any kind of housing, we actually strengthen the economy and help maintain the value of those homes. And the big question is also, what do we do to make sure that we don't have to saddle the next generation with having to own a home to be able to retire? So people who maybe don't want to own a home or are in a position to rent, how do we make sure that their retirement is stable? How do people whose homes, don't want to stay at home but still need income to retire, how do we boost and make sure our seniors are well taken care of? So I think it's a bit of a red herring in some respects, because there's no evidence that building more housing for people in the lower spectrum has ever reduced the value of somebody's single-family home. But also it does speak to why have we saddled people with that is their best option for retirement? You know, where are the fixed pensions? Where is the other options that we used to have?
So, in July, my parents have been older and I'm going to stay close, but there are a few options for them. What would you do for them?
What will you do?
Yeah, Melinda, what will you do for them?
Yeah, well, you know, I think every demographic is affected by this situation, and what we were just talking about, you know, people have homes, they can't afford to let go of their home, but there's nowhere, you know, to move into, so we need to build housing, and we need to build, you know, mixed communities. We need people to be able to stay in their homes and stay in their communities. And so for the land trust, you know, our goal is to have housing that responds to seniors and young people's needs, and have a real mixed community. That housing should be part of building community and maintaining community and keeping those connections going. So that, you know, housing is so crucial to aging well and having wellness, because and growing up well. Having those community connections is, you know, whether if you have housing that provides connection or housing that isolates you, can be a factor of form, factor of location, factor of how expensive, how much you have to work to maintain your housing. So, you know, I think that you know, not-for-profit housing development and maintaining housing affordability is key, and we need to build more. We have Fairburn being built in Huntsville, which is, you know, district-funded, district-managed supportive housing. You know, and they are trying new things to make it more of an apartment style housing rather than, you know, a hospital institutional type setting. But we need a lot more options, and the great news is there's an enormous amount of creativity, but it's expensive and it's non-market, so it needs to be funded, publicly funded, and it be engaged and led by community organizations and the social service sector and civil society, hand in hand with government. So the government.
Yeah, so I'll say a few things. I live in the East End of Toronto. I grew up in the East End of Toronto. My parents are still living in the East End of Toronto, and they were both teachers. And my grandma and my grandparents lived in Grimsby, and after my grandfather passed, my grandma started to, you know, not be able to live on her own entirely the same way. And it was just good fortune that my mom was able to do this just before the pandemic happened. But she was able to renovate her basement and turn it into a one-bedroom apartment, and moved my grandma into that one-bedroom apartment, and it was actually just good fortune of timing, because then my grandmother wasn't isolated through that time period. But we have a secondary suite program now that is coming online. It's funding is there, the development of the policy is there. It's not. It'll be fully online after the election. And that's a financing to make it easier for that kind of work to happen, to support homeowners in creating those secondary suites, which I think really matters to help folks age in place, and certainly support loved ones as they need that support. The second thing, we do have funding for supportive housing. We have funding for this through our $14 billion affordable housing fund. When I talk about the federal government reasserting the role in community housing, and this is a, you know, more, you know, there's a range of kinds of supportive housing, but you know, I was talking about how I just toured a couple months ago. It was through federal dollars that was able to be built. It was a partnership between the local hospital and a community housing organization called Wood Green in Toronto. But they were able to build 13 units that seniors that needed an alternate level of care, but they were in hospital beds because that alternate level of care didn't exist. They were able to move into a place of their own, but there was 24-hour PSW support on site, and that was realized. Yes, the hospital's there and they're providing operational dollars. Wood Green was able to provide the space, but we provided the capital dollars to make sure that build happened. And that's, you know, that funding will continue to be in place. We've got a $10 billion commitment in the course of this election that speaks to building more student housing, seniors housing, and housing for those in the greatest need. So that kind of an approach will continue, and we're going to double down and increase support for that. The last thing I'll just say is about the need for more non-market and affordable housing, across the continuum. And I'll just pick on Sault Ste. Marie, because I think they've done something very interesting, where they set $10 million aside. They acquired rundown homes in the residential resale market. They fixed them up. They rent them out 20% below market. They have enough revenue coming in to set dollars aside for capital reserve, and they still have between a $300,000 and $400,000 dividend to then acquire new homes. And it's a slow but sustainable growth model, where they are also, though, able to manage and rent out units 20% below market, affordable in perpetuity for folks of all ages. And I think just more of that also allows folks to downsize when they need to downsize, to make sure they are able to have an affordable place to live, again, for as long as they need it. Because I just see too many stories of people when they're ready to downsize, they go, but how am I supposed to make the math work? It doesn't work. And so we've got to continue to play, I think, a really strong federal role to make sure we build that kind of housing.
And it's bouncing off that, Nick, I get a lot of questions. We've got a couple more, and then I might get in there. I will try to open the questions for you all. What about municipal barriers? How are we going to move those to the development process? That's a big question I get on the road a lot.
Yeah, so this is where I would say you won't hear contrasts in language between Liberals and Conservatives, because you'll hear both parties talk about cutting red tape and speeding up processes, but there's a different approach. So the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force, which I wish Doug Ford would listen to, but my joke is, I wish he took healthcare and housing as seriously as he takes Fox News, because he's very good on Fox News, I think, but on housing, we're really struggling. The Affordable Housing Affordability Task Force tells us exclusionary zoning is a real problem. The roadblocks that municipalities put in place, and just the delays in permitting and the delays in enabling buildings to happen is a real barrier. And we see Edmonton as an example, building more homes than pretty near any other municipality in this country. And why? Because they have a very fast approval system, and they're very flexible in their zoning. They have reformed the rules. So actually, when CMHC says doubling housing over the next 10 years, meaning double housing starts, they'll say across Ontario, in Nova Scotia, in Montreal, and across Quebec, in Alberta, except for Edmonton, because they're building so much. And so we need to, I think, take municipalities that are doing everything right, hold them up as examples, and then reward the municipalities. So we did. We just gave Edmonton, not only they got money through the Housing Accelerator Fund, but then they got a top-up because they were doing so well. Calgary got a top-up because they were doing so well. London, Ontario got a top-up because they were doing so well. We need to reward municipalities that are doing everything right, cutting red tape, eliminating that kind of exclusionary zoning, so there's opportunities for gentle density everywhere, greater density, near post-secondary institutions, and in my world, near transit, so we do see greater density on boulevards and on transit routes where we need them, but gentle density everywhere, and then and speed of approval. Like the market needs certainty to build, and if they don't have that certainty, time is money. If it's going to take too long, then we're going to see prices that are too high. And on development charges, and again, this is mixed across municipalities. Ontario and BC are the worst offenders. So when you see housing starts grew at about 2% year over year, but they were down 9% in Ontario, they were down another 10% in BC. Why? Because development charges are particularly problematic in those two jurisdictions. And so we've made a commitment to drive down the cost of home building by also supporting municipalities in that way of how, we have to pay for housing enabling infrastructure one way or another, but if growth pays for all growth, we're not going to get the growth that we need. And so we're going to, reward municipalities for doing everything right and cutting red tape and speeding up approvals and making public land available to drive affordability further. But we're also going to make sure we work in partnership with them to pay for housing enabling infrastructure and drive down taxes on housing.
I think first of all, we did have some municipal councillors here, and I don't want to get them in trouble, but are they found that I'm still here? Okay, oh great, excellent. So talk to your municipal councillors. But we fortunately, we are lucky in this area. We do have a lot of political will at the municipal and district, lower and upper tier municipalities, which is fantastic. I think one of the things that I would like to see our municipalities do when we're working with them is to recognize the community-led not-for-profit developers as their partners, and we are working to build those relationships and to do that because the permanent affordability is really key, and they need the staff to work through that and give that prioritization. Huntsville is certainly currently right now piloting sort of a concierge service for a not-for-profit development scheme to try to for affordable, permanently affordable housing. So I'm hoping that will result in a faster process. And I think also there's, to avoid the unnecessary conflict and delays of concerns about public reaction to zoning. A lot of zoning doesn't get changed, or it gets called NIMBY, but often it's actually real concerns about communities or knowledge that community members have about what will or will not fit in their communities. There's always people who will oppose anything, but there's also a lot of really great knowledge that meaningful community engagement ahead of time in a broader way around zoning can really help, I think, accelerate those processes and build acceptance and help projects get along faster. So that's what I would like to see municipalities do.
Can I just say one?
Yeah.
So I just want to say one more thing about the contrast between Liberals and Conservatives on this, because again, you hear us all talk about red tape and cutting red tape and cutting taxes. So I just mentioned rewarding municipalities based on the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations. Rewarding municipalities that are doing everything right. Okay? So Pure Poly have railed against gatekeepers for a very long time, and you really meant municipal gatekeepers. And then they put their platform out. And the platform basically says, they are going to reward municipalities and really punish municipalities if they don't meet these targets, but they're going to take federal, undisclosed, vague federal funding away from municipalities that don't meet a 15% growth target that's compounded, okay? So what does that mean? It means that if you're not really paying attention, you're going, yeah, great, get those municipalities building 15% more every single year. What's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is, I mentioned Edmonton. Edmonton is clocking at a very good rate, and they don't have to double their housing starts. They have to maintain where they're at. So you're asking Edmonton now to grow from already the strongest housing starts in this country, grow 15% this year, and then grow 15% from that, because yes, their plan is compounded, and you're basically punishing those municipalities that are today doing everything right because you're asking them to do something that is completely unreasonable. And they're going to get punished if they don't do it. And then you're going to take a municipality that is doing everything wrong today, and you're going to say, your goal is the same. We want you to increase your housing starts by 15%, even though your housing starts are way, way too low, and you should be increasing them far more than that. And so this one-size-fits-all imposition on municipalities across this country that is really using only a stick and not a carrot, with an unreasonable demand in some cases, and a demand that is not reasonable enough in other cases, makes no sense at all. Now, it's a hard thing to put into a slogan, but there is a serious solution on the one hand. There's a serious solution to put on one hand, and there is a cartoon solution, like a back of a napkin at best solution on the other, and we should be very clear in a selection. For anyone who cares about housing, there's one party with a serious plan. It's the Liberal Party.
Jory's never getting the mic back.
No, that's it. I've lost it. Sorry, no questions. They're off to the races now. We're just going to sit here and...
Yeah. Well, my favorite slogan is, to quote Carolyn Weitzman, is there's no such thing as trickle-down housing, only trickle-up housing. And so when we talk about reforming zoning and accelerating permitting processes and development processes and relieving development charges, a unit that's going to be owned by a financial investment company with stock shareholders around the world is not the same thing as building a community-led affordable housing for a member of the community who is in core housing need. The development processes they may have to go through are the same, but they should not be treated the same, and they should not be treated as equal contributions to our housing need.
100%.
Is that okay? Okay, so the one question we did have, we get a lot, is infrastructure.
Yeah.
So how are we, with all this new housing, it comes with it, so how are we going to enable it, support it, develop it?
Yeah, so I would say shared responsibility in some ways across federal and provincial governments, because when it comes to wastewater infrastructure, for example, the province helps to fund that. We also, though, have a program called the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund. It's a $6 billion program over the course of 10 years, and it helps to fund water, wastewater, sewage, and anything water-related for housing and enabling infrastructure. I think, in my world, if I could tweak that program, I would expand it to beyond water and enable that funding to flow to municipalities for projects that are going to really get more housing built by building that core infrastructure that's going to enable those homes. And so that's one part of the picture. The other part of the picture is development charges do pay, not always. So some municipalities are better at making sure development charges flow to where they should be flowing, which is getting that kind of housing enabling infrastructure built. Other municipalities use them for, say, a community center that the whole community can benefit from, but it's not just focused on that new housing, and they don't want to put that on the broader tax base, so they put it on the new builds. And so, you look at that and you would say, well, we do need to make sure that as we drive down development charges, and we make sure that homes are more affordable by driving down those taxes are also understandably paying for housing enabling infrastructure. How are we going to make municipalities whole? And so there's a $1.5 billion in the platform to enable that to happen, to say we are going to partner with municipalities as we're asking them to reduce their taxes. We're also understanding that it's not going to be on the backs of, by cutting funding for the very thing we need, which is housing enabling infrastructure. We're going to be there to partner with municipalities and provide funding to municipalities so that taxes on multi-unit residential builds are able to be reduced. The last thing is, and this is the first time I've seen the federal government really, in my 10 years, get into this space in a more direct way, but there's certain housing enabling infrastructure, and then there's other infrastructure that the community needs. And so we have a community infrastructure fund. We also have a healthcare infrastructure fund that we focus on building hospitals and other healthcare related infrastructure. And so there's a real push in this platform as we think about, not just the tariff war with the US, and that's front of mind, but also how are we going to make ourselves more resilient? It's by building this country up, building all kinds of infrastructure, an east-west transmission grid, and there's a nation-building fund for nation-building projects, but specific to housing and specific to the related needs to housing, it's reducing development charges, housing enabling infrastructure fund, a community infrastructure fund, and a healthcare infrastructure fund, and then really what's left out of that, I think provinces are going to have to continue to step up on healthcare and education, which is their core jurisdiction, and we'll continue to be a partner, but they've got a strong role to play still.
I think when you touch on planning, that's the key piece is we don't want to have to do this over and over again and make these huge capital investments every 10 years. This is 30, 60, 100-year planning for infrastructure, and so we need to do that with the lens of the climate change that we're experiencing and the future climate that we're going to have, and the health and wellness of the communities that we want to have for the next 100 years. And so making sure that we're not building stranded assets like natural gas pipelines or methane pipelines, and ensuring that we're building assets and investing in money that's going to help us mitigate and adapt to the changing climate, and ensure that we're building infrastructure that really is built community sustainability for a long term.
So just bouncing off that, do you want to talk about how we're going to build these houses in line with the climate, and also for the climate, as you see with forest fires, and et cetera, and also with an environmentally responsible footprint?
So I think Melinda is well placed as the owner of a company that builds passive homes. But I'll just say a couple of things. Obviously, there's I think a huge opportunity to continue work that we started around retrofitting existing homes to reduce emissions and to improve the carbon footprint, but also as we build new homes. Part of it is the building code and making sure that we have high standards in the building code, but part of it is also ensuring that we are, and this is, off-site construction isn't just about lowering costs. It also opens up a world where you're able to make sure that the buildings you are building are more resilient and energy efficient. And so I think you can speak more specifically to the details of that, but you have in your own community an example of the kind of company we want to see grow and succeed to deliver the kinds of homes that we need, not just next year, but 50 years from now.
Yeah, the housing construction sector contributes, is half of our carbon emissions and is a huge contributor to our climate problem, but it's also an enormous opportunity for a solution. If we build with materials that, short cycle, biogenic materials like straw and hemp and waste wood, we can actually help mitigate the climate, and we can certainly build to high quality where people inside those homes have fresh air circulation that's going to help them in the case of forest fires as well. So there's the mitigation by building with the materials that don't cause climate change in the first place, and then the adaptation of building a house that is built with materials that are going to be resilient and can withstand keep people cool and thermally comfortable, so we're not overheating in our homes in the hot summers. And so that's a design from the get-go. And we have that technology, and we can we do that in our build homes like that in our factory in Lake of Bays, and it's something that can be a standard that any builder can build to across Canada. And local municipalities, many municipalities in Canada actually have building code incentives or requirements, especially if you look at BC, but also there are Toronto is looking at some of these incentives where builders, when they apply for the building permit, either they can get a discount on the building permit or incentives or sped through the permitting process if they show that they're using a wall assembly that has met certain requirements around climate and the health and wellness of people, which of course hopefully that will become the bare minimum of what's required. So there's all kinds of tools to incentivize that, and then I forgot my other thing. I'll remember later. Yeah.
All right, let me have a point. Just anything else you want to say about the housing program, and then I'll give it the final word to you, Melinda, and then I'll open it up. Is that okay? Sure. Okay. Nate, is there anything else you want to add to the program itself before I open it up?
I will just say, because I already drew a contrast to the Conservatives on market housing, the biggest contrast is actually on non-market housing. Because here we are talking about building at this massive scale, maximizing public land, partnering with non-market actors, and really driving change to get more community housing built. And when Pierre Poilievre has been asked a question about the government's role in home building, he has said the government should get out of the home building business entirely and sell off land to developers. That is the exact opposite of what we need to deliver affordability and perpetuity, the kind of affordability that we deserve.
A big piece of why we're in this situation is because of tax changes that were made in the late 80s, early 90s that allowed for financial investment firms to buy housing or made it a much more profitable investment for them. And so we have seen a country go from having virtually no housing not treated as investment but as a home to completely the other side, where now housing in our country it has become treated like an investment, and it's not. Housing is a human right. Housing is shelter. Nobody should be without housing, and so we need to flip that script. If anybody wants